Welcome back, everyone, to the Chiefs Catalyst podcast, designed to provide short, insightful, and informative episodes for the dynamic public safety leaders of today. The Chiefs Catalyst is for those who are looking for ways to streamline their departmental operations and increase efficiency and effectiveness through people, strategies, and technologies. If you like what you hear or want to discuss a topic further, send us an email at catalystpodcast@proton.me. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us again. I'm your host, Aiden, a local crime analyst in North Texas that's passionate about helping you as a dynamic public safety leader shift your thinking, grow your thought process about how we think about law enforcement as a business and how to be most effective and efficient in our processes. If you joined us in the last episode, we talked about the business of law enforcement and really leveraging some of our agency metrics in order to demonstrate how we're using products and software and services and our people to be effective in our crime reduction and our crime prevention. Today's episode is all about the data and where that data comes from. So helping you to understand what data might be available to you and where it might live at your agency. Like I said previously, we discussed shifting our view of law enforcement to be like a business. But I thought it's a good idea to talk about where this data comes from. And if you, as a public safety agency, have that data, do you really have it? Do you own it? Is it housed by somewhere else? And by that, I mean, is it kept at your agency where you have open and free access? Or is it maybe your town or city's IT department on a server that you have to partner with them? Or maybe a third party owns your data and you have to work closely with that vendor in order to actually access it. So when talking about law enforcement data, we often first turn to CAD and RMS. So industry terms of computer-aided dispatch and records management systems. At its most basic function, computer-aided dispatch and these records management systems are simply an agency's primary data collection device, right? Thinking about checking off a box on a spreadsheet. All it's doing is taking in that information. Hopefully, the way that you have it set up, whether it's with your IT department or your vendor, you own that data. You're able to transform it. You're able to review it, visualize it, do great things with it. But CAD and RMS is supposed to just record that data for you to do great things with it. It shouldn't be doing all of those transforms and things for you. But it captures things like response times, call for service numbers, call types, offenses, personally identifiable information, phone numbers, etc. And normally we use this information to present crime numbers or statistics that may be important to you as the chief or your elected officials or executive leadership, depending on what goals or crime your area of responsibility covers. Another way in Texas we use it is to provide racial profiling reports under the Sandra Bland Act. Now, that's not to say we show reports of how we racially profile people, but we use racial profiling data in order to demonstrate that the traffic stops that we're making are in line with our target demographic or our citizen demographic. We're not profiling one certain demographic of the people. I like to use purple-haired people, right? We're not discriminating against one particular person, but these are some ways that we've used this law enforcement data in the past. But internally, I want to think about today what some other data sources might be that could be leveraged to turn into agency metrics. Like we talked about last week, metrics help us justify our resources that we've asked for, how we've allocated them. They may tell somebody on the outside that our strategy is working, right? We don't want our stakeholders or our community members to feel like they've been sold a bill of goods because we told them that we're the police, you just let us handle it. Instead, we want to share with them, hey, this is how we're going to fight crime exactly. This is what we're doing about it. And actually, here's documented what we've done and how we achieved those goals. So we want to think about some other data sources that might be leveraged to turn into some of these agency metrics, depending on your jurisdiction or your area of responsibility. So think about what tools you might provide as a chief to your frontline personnel. Basically, right, we provide uniforms and equipment, we provide firearms and training, we provide vehicles. But what systems do they have access to, which might help them perform their jobs better? Maybe subscription-based public information systems like LexisNexis or TLO or Clear or IDI. Right? Those are public information systems that you can subscribe to for a monthly or yearly cost, and they give your people a rich pool of data. Sometimes they'll even take your agency data and transform it into visualizations and stuff for you. But maybe law enforcement technology like license plate readers or facial recognition. Perhaps in its most basic form, officers may individually keep some type of spreadsheet or log of activity directed towards a certain function. And in Texas, again, we have a STEP grant program which funds certain traffic enforcement activities. Well, we can say, yes, all of our traffic stops were done here and here, but in order for us to report statistics to the STEP program, we have to record those separately or as their own type of traffic stop. And so sometimes our officers keep those logs to manually turn in those reports. Another way, simple format, you might have a bulletin board even in the break room that shares pertinent departmental information. But these all could be really deep or really shallow pools of information depending on your department's operations. However, each of these sources might contain data that you could leverage to discuss your law enforcement efforts. So one source is user data. How many times did people log into the software? Hopefully, if it's on their computer in their patrol car, right, they're logging in every single day, maybe multiple times a shift if you allow them to log out when they're maybe inside the building or writing reports on another computer. But we also want to know how many times they use the software. How many times did they run certain items or use certain functions or searches within the systems that you've given them access to? How did they use that platform? Maybe how many cases did it impact? I learned this from my assistant chief to be a big stickler of if there's a blank to fill in, whether it's required or not, we should always pack that record and fill in that, especially for like a reference number or a case number. Not just to cover our own selves, but to document adequately what we used the system for and how it impacted our operations. Now, there'll always be an argument that everything we're doing is law enforcement related, so we shouldn't have to get nitpicky on logging those types of reference items. But think about if you're able to go back and say to your legislature, hey, we used our CAD and RMS internally to search people for prior context 15,000 times this year, or whatever number might be reasonable for your agency. So maybe it's something that you pay extra for your CAD or RMS vendor to have certain advanced features or advanced user abilities. But you could actually go back and justify and say that, yeah, we're actually using it. Here's the cases that they impacted. Here's the cases by month, by officer, who's our top user, etc. The next point in that is a cost-benefit analysis. Based on what you paid for and how it was used, was there a good return on investment? Like I said, we don't want to sell our legislature a bill of goods, and we don't want to feel like we've been sold a bill of goods from a vendor. If we're paying for an advanced user functionality, especially if we're paying extra for it, it would be nice to be able to say, hey, this is exactly how many times we use that. Or maybe we didn't really use those functions. There wasn't a lot of need for it. Maybe we don't need everybody in the department to have a license, just the people in this specialized unit or with this type of role, maybe an analyst, maybe an investigator, maybe a patrol supervisor, depending on how you're doing it. Because if not everybody's using it and it's something that everybody's paying for, maybe you need to train people to use it. Or if it's truly something that they don't need, you might be able to save a little bit of money on the back end and limit who can access those specialized things. So consider some of the metrics that we discussed in the previous episode and how they could, like I said, help justify your efforts or requests. Part of this analysis in looking at the metrics might be goals that you have to set in advance. So think now about goals for fiscal year 25, 26, 27, and where you want to see your agency in the next 1, 3 to 5 years. For example, if we're using a specific license plate reader program and we're trying to justify that cost, we may want to tell the legislature, similar to grants, that we're planning to locate at least 10 bad guys and stolen vehicles in this fiscal year. This is why it's important, like I said, to develop these strategies in advance so that you can use your tools to effectively implement and practice them. If you don't have a strategy in place, it's kind of hard. Like I said, it's like going to war without a plan. we're always going to go fight the bad guys with some type of plan. We're going to address active shooters in the way that we've been trained. That's why we train on them a lot. That's why we train together with other people. We want to have a plan for all of these big critical incidents. But it's also beneficial to have a strategy and a plan for our day to day and set those measurable goals, knowing what metrics you can leverage so that you can articulate how you did those things in the future. So, another source outside of CAD and RMS that can be used to track data and information might look like a SharePoint site or some type of OneDrive, like Microsoft OneDrive or Google Docs shared document environment. But the challenge that comes with this is maintaining some of these sites, documents, or things internally. However, there are some paid software solutions that help. I'm not here to recommend software. I'm not getting sponsored by anybody to do this. But if you're looking for recommendations, drop me an email, and we can talk about some of the vendors that might be able to assist you in some of this data collection. But like I said, the challenge comes with maintaining these things internally. Do you have somebody at your department that can be in charge of all of these shared sites? Or is it somebody from your IT department that is responsible for a shared drive or building a SharePoint site? And if not, do you need to get one? Do you need to train somebody internally? Or if you have somebody internally, what happens if they leave? Is there anybody else in the succession plan that knows how to maintain that system after the first person is gone? So those are some ways that you can use, or some places that you can capture data. So you might use that shared site or shared document to track some of those manual things rather than an officer doing it on their own. You might say, hey, we had a traffic complaint over here off Smith Street. We want to know how many traffic stops came out of that specific interaction. But we all know if a patrol officer is out running traffic at Smith and Main, they may see a violation there, but they may not get them stopped depending on the environmental conditions of the day until another location. So it might not be enough to just pull stops at Smith and Main and Smith out of your CAD and RMS. You might have to widen your search. Same as if an officer randomly stops somebody at Smith and Main or Smith, it's not necessarily dedicated time or stops to that complaint that was made. You may be able to count it in the back end, but if you want to know, are your people doing what the chief, what the town administration, what the elected officials have asked them to help, what complaints have been raised or made, you're going to want somewhere to keep this information in. So let's talk a little bit about recommendations for some of these agencies that may manually track data through some type of Excel, spreadsheet, logbook, or shared environment. So my number one recommendation always, if you're not using some type of pre-existing software or a vendor that will help you do this, and you're allowing people to capture data on their own, you want to make sure that there is some type of standardized format for data collection and standardized data collection. That doesn't mean, well, nights does it one way and days does it another way, and this shift is special, they're not super tech savvy, or they're incredibly tech savvy and they have way more data than anybody else because they're tracking and capturing every single little bit. But it's not, manual collection is not a recommended practice, but it could be beneficial for some short-term applications. Like I said, if you don't have somewhere already to capture information on a specific complaint, you might say, hey, everybody, we've got this traffic complaint at Main and Smith. It's speeders on the hill. Here's the shared document that we can use. And we're all going to put our information in there. How many stops we did, how much time we spent, and what came out of those, how many warnings and all that. But this is not super practical because then somebody has to go back in on the back end and pull out that data. If you've allowed people to collect it individually, you have to get it from each one of those people and ensure that everybody is reporting so that you don't have discrepancies. If 10 people report one week and only 8 people report the next, and 14 people report the third week because somebody found data from a couple weeks ago that they didn't turn in. So manual data collection like this is not necessarily a good best practice, but it can be done if there's some type of standardized format to reduce the amount of data cleaning on the back end. But it would also be really beneficial if you're as an analyst who has spent many hours of my relatively short career cleaning data, having some type of standardized format, standardized guidelines, maybe an SOP on how we're going to report and collect this data in order to use it later on is incredibly beneficial. Further, if you can have some type of open database connection to where you're capturing this data, you can easily pipe this into visualizations. If you're not planning to use some type of manual data collection or sporadic data collection, and instead are looking for some type of vendor, maybe a new CAD or RMS that collects all of that data for you, researching and identifying them can be a daunting but really worthwhile task if the right vendor is selected. So some of those things to think about is, where is that data stored in selecting a vendor? How is it going to get back to me? And is this going to help me actually increase how and what data we can use and ensure that we're collecting information that best addresses the metrics that we're trying to present? I'll use hair color as one. We may never need to know how many people we pulled over or stopped with purple hair. So if you're paying extra for that metric, make sure that it's in your goals. And while it's kind of a funny thing to think about, you don't want to pay for things that you're not going to use, and you want to make sure that whatever software, whatever vendor you go with is actually going to fit into your strategy and fit into the metrics that it's going to provide you the metrics that you need in order to justify their use, in order to justify what you're doing and how you're deploying your people and your strategies. So once you've thought about some of these data sources and the disparate areas that you find them, you may find yourself wondering, how are you going to collect information from them further, or how are you going to turn them into something usable? So what I mean by that is, you know that your CAD and RMS collect this data. You know that your people are reporting data into whatever system or shared drive that you're using, but how do you get it back? And who's responsible for that? Is it the chief? Is it the administrative assistant? Is it a patrol officer? Is it a sergeant? My recommendation will always be your crime analyst. And having those conversations on the front end can help you identify an analyst that knows these goals, that is comfortable working with this, and is actually the focus of our next 2 episodes, talking about the analyst as the master of data. We should never have data coming from 105 different people and sources up to the chief. We should have one collection point that comes in and through. That way we have standardized visualizations, which is actually our topic in episode 4 on the power of visualizations and how to achieve some effortless comprehension and effective communication in this. To recap, what we've talked about today is understanding what data might be available to you and where it might live at your agency, whether it's in your CAD and RMS, whether it's in a cloud-based SharePoint environment that your IT controls, or on an internal server, or if it's something that your vendor owns that you have to cooperate with them to get. There's lots of different places that it could live. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that that data, whether it's user reports or how a product is actually being utilized to meet your agency's goals, you want to make sure that you can get that information out, and that what you can get out actually describes what you're doing or contributes towards the goals that you've set and what you're trying to tell your decision makers. If you like what you've heard today, feel free to let us know. We'd invite you to subscribe to or follow the podcast on the links in the platform that you're using. If you have questions, comments, or you want to talk more about this, please feel free to drop us an email at catalystpodcast@proton.me, and we hope to see you here next time.